I've always been a strong woman. Not strong like I could lift a car, but strong where it counted, in my will, in my marriage, and in running our house in Sausalito. At 66, I expected a few aches and pains, maybe a little slowing down, but I never expected to feel like I was running a marathon just to walk up the stairs. For months, I'd been making excuses. It's just getting older. I told myself. It's the San Francisco hills. I need more sleep. But the truth was, I felt weak. Not just tired, but that deep, unsettling weakness that makes you stop mid-sentence just to catch your breath. My doctor, Dr. Laura Jenkins, is well regarded, practicing in one of the city's sophisticated medical facilities. She's a good cardiologist, but lately going to her office felt like admitting defeat. Edward, my husband, Edward Ortiz, he's a surgeon, a well-known one. He always managed my health, always insisted he knew best. He was the one who usually brushed off my complaints. "Donna, you're fine," he'd say, not even looking up from his medical journal. "You're just anxious. Take it easy." I'd been letting his confidence override my own nagging fear, but I finally hit a wall. I couldn't ignore the way my chest felt tight just walking to the mailbox. So here I was in Dr. Jenkins' office in San Francisco. The room was typical, cool, quiet, with posters about heart health I tried not to read. I felt that familiar knot of worry tight in my stomach. I was terrified of what she might find. I didn't want to be sick. I didn't want the life I'd built, the busy calendar, the lunches with friends, the beautiful home, to be overtaken by appointments and medications. I lived in a constant state of low-level panic about my well-being. Dr. Jenkins walked in, pulling up a stool. She didn't have the usual harried look. She was calm, professional, and had an unnerving stillness to her. "Donna," she started looking over the initial tests they'd run. The EKG, the blood work. "I'm glad you finally came in." I tried to keep my voice steady. I know. Edward said it was probably just stress. But the breathlessness is getting worse. I can't sleep through the night." She set the clipboard down. That simple action, putting the clipboard down, felt like a thunderclap. She didn't dismiss my concern. She didn't tell me to relax. She leaned forward. "Donna, we need to talk about your heart's function." My hands were suddenly clammy. The air felt thick. Everything I feared was right there in her serious face. "The echocardiogram we ran last week. I want to be honest with you. It's showing significant strain. Your heart isn't pumping efficiently." She paused, measuring her words carefully. "I know Edward is a surgeon, but have you seen a cardiologist regularly? I mean, besides this annual checkup?" I hesitated. Edward always handled everything. He'd bring home prescriptions, talk to doctors on the phone, and assure me everything was current and fine. Edward manages my blood pressure. He says he monitors my heart constantly. He's the expert, you know. Dr. Jenkins gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Donna, I'm seeing some things here that concern me deeply. The strain is more than significant. The symptoms you're describing, the weakness, the severe breathlessness, are red flags. When your heart can't pump enough blood, the rest of your body suffers. Your organs aren't getting the oxygen they need." I felt a cold dread spread through me, chilling me to the bone. This wasn't the usual lecture about salt intake or moderate exercise. This was different. This was serious. What does that mean, Dr. Jenkins?" She met my gaze directly. "It means we need to get to the bottom of this immediately, Donna. We are looking at signs that your heart is in a much worse place than we thought. Your fear is warranted." Something inside me told me that this time it wasn't just another checkup. I sat there, frozen. My beautiful life in San Francisco, the one I'd fought so hard to keep normal, suddenly felt like it was balancing on a single, frail muscle. All those months of worry had been right. I wasn't just getting older. Something was truly, desperately wrong. My whole body felt heavy with the weight of the realization. Edward, the expert, had insisted I was fine, but a stranger in a clinic chair was telling me my life was in danger. I felt a surge of fear, quickly followed by a tiny, hot spark of anger. Why hadn't Edward seen this? The appointment was over, but the fear was just beginning. I walked out of the office and into the bustling streets of San Francisco, feeling suddenly very small and very fragile. I was alone with this terrible, unsettling news. I needed to call Edward, but for the first time in 40 years, I didn't want his expert opinion. I wanted the truth about my heart, and I was going to get it. I didn't call Edward immediately after that first unsettling appointment. I couldn't. I drove my car straight home to Sausalito, but I didn't go inside. I just sat in the driveway, staring at the manicured garden, the same garden Edward always told me to relax in. How could I relax when I felt like a ticking clock? The next day, I was back in San Francisco, not in a calm checkup room, but in Dr. Jenkins' small, efficient medical office located in the Civic Center district. She'd scheduled me for what she called an urgent consultation based on my initial tests. She'd run a few more aggressive blood panels and another, more specialized heart scan, which she now had the results for. I sat in the chair, hands clenched in my lap, feeling the familiar hum of the city outside, the ambulances, the traffic, life moving on while mine felt stalled. Dr. Jenkins skipped the small talk entirely. She placed a sheet of paper on the desk, not letting me see the words, but the way she held it, so carefully, told me everything. "Donna, I have the final results," she began, her voice low and serious. "The strain we saw yesterday is worse than we initially suspected. Your heart is failing to pump enough blood to your vital organs. The technical term for this is cardiogenic shock. The name itself, shock, felt violent. My mind instantly jumped to television shows, to emergency rooms, to people flatlining. I felt a cold wave wash over me. Shock. What does that mean for me day to day? Is it reversible?" I asked, forcing the words out. Dr. Jenkins explained it in simple, everyday English, avoiding medical jargon where she could. "Think of your heart as a pump, Donna, a powerful pump. In cardiogenic shock, that pump is severely weakened, like a motor running on empty. It can't generate the pressure needed to push oxygen-rich blood effectively to your kidneys, your liver, your brain. That's why you've been feeling so weak and breathless." She continued, emphasizing the urgency. "This is a life-threatening condition. It requires immediate, aggressive treatment. This isn't just something we manage with a change in diet, Donna. This is severe." The reality of the diagnosis hit me with the force of a physical blow. Edward always talked about my blood pressure, my cholesterol, all those manageable things. He'd made me feel like I just needed to worry less. But Dr. Jenkins was telling me I had something catastrophic. My whole life, I'd been so focused on being strong, on being the capable one, that I'd ignored the slow, creeping decline. I thought I was just getting older, not dying. But this was something much worse. It wasn't just the fatigue of aging. It was my body shutting down. It was my mortality staring me down from across the desk. Suddenly, all those moments from the past few months flooded back, standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, waiting for the dizziness to pass, having to stop halfway up the stairs in our Sausalito home, watching Edward move through life with easy, careless energy while I felt like I was wading through cement. I had minimized it all. Edward had minimized it all. A fresh wave of panic hit me. I don't understand how this happened. Edward is a surgeon. He's been monitoring my hypertension for years. How could it get this bad under his watch? The question felt huge, heavy, and full of accusation I didn't yet dare voice out loud. Dr. Jenkins simply nodded, avoiding eye contact for a moment as she adjusted the papers. It's a complicated situation, Donna. High blood pressure over a long period can certainly weaken the heart muscle, but this severity requires immediate, careful attention. She didn't directly answer my question about Edward, but her silence spoke volumes. It planted the first, sharp seed of doubt. She then laid out the brutal next steps. We need to hospitalize you immediately. We need to stabilize your blood pressure and heart rate using 4 medications. Then we'll run more detailed tests to determine the exact cause and the best course of long-term treatment. Hospitalization. That word felt like the end of my independent life. I thought of my beautiful house, my friends, my routine, all about to be stripped away. I thought of Edward, and the thought now brought confusion and a rising anger, not comfort. I have to call Edward, I whispered, realizing the gravity of the decision I was about to face. Would he try to take over, or would he finally admit this was beyond his control? Dr. Jenkins looked at me with genuine sympathy. Take a minute, Donna. This is a lot to process, but we have to move fast. Your life is on the line. My reflection on this moment, realizing my own mortality, was overwhelming. I wasn't ready to die. I was angry that I was even in this position. The diagnosis wasn't just a medical event. It was a betrayal of my trust in my own health, and maybe, just maybe, a betrayal of the trust one placed in my husband. The shock of my condition was turning into a desperate need for answers, for control, and for truth. And I knew this was just the beginning. Calling Edward was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I didn't tell him I was in the clinic when I called. I just said, Edward, I need to be hospitalized immediately. Dr. Jenkins says it's cardiogenic shock. The line went silent, and for a powerful surgeon who always had a definitive answer, his hesitation was jarring. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, a mixture of professional panic and personal shock. Shock. Donna, that's severe. Why didn't you call me first? I should have reviewed your charts. I'll arrange everything at St. Jude's tonight. I'll handle the admission. He immediately tried to take charge, to pull the situation back into his world of control. But I felt a new firmness. No, Edward, Dr. Jenkins is managing this. I'm going into San Francisco General. She's already arranged the transfer. You can meet me there. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. For the first time, I was drawing a medical boundary. The next few days in the San Francisco hospital were a blur of 4 drips, strange noises, and cold air. They were pumping me full of medication, trying to stabilize my heart. The whole experience felt terrifyingly anonymous. Edward visited, of course. He was all bedside manner, stern, worried, and overly helpful, fussing with my blankets and talking to the nurses like he was still in charge. But his presence offered no comfort. All I could think about was, how could he have missed this? After I was stable enough to leave the intensive care unit, Dr. Jenkins came by. She explained that the initial stabilization was complete, but my condition required long-term, specialized management. Donna, your case is complicated by the severity of the heart failure, she said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. I want you to see the best specialist available to design your treatment plan. I'm referring you to Dr. Adrian Stone in Berkeley. Berkeley. It felt like another world away from my familiar routine. Dr. Stone is renowned for advanced heart conditions. He's the person you want handling this, she insisted. He'll be able to confirm the underlying cause and get you on the most aggressive, targeted treatment plan. We need a fresh set of eyes on this. A fresh set of eyes. The phrase resonated with a chilling clarity. It suggested that the old set of eyes, Edward's eyes, might have been inadequate, or worse, deliberately blinded. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and fear. relief that someone truly specialized was going to help me, and fear of accepting that my once vibrant life might never be the same again. I was 66, but I wasn't ready to trade my busy life for an endless cycle of doctors and hospitals. The thought of facing a new doctor, laying out my entire medical history, a history that Edward had always gatekept, was exhausting. It was also terrifying because it meant accepting that the life I had known, the independent life of running my home in Sausalito and hosting dinners, was gone. I felt a profound sense of loss. I felt like my life was slipping away from me. It was true. It wasn't just the shock diagnosis. It was the sudden realization that every plan, every trip, every quiet expectation for my future was now subject to the whims of this failing heart. Everything felt out of control. Edward reacted predictably when I told him about the referral. Adrian Stone? Why him? He's brilliant, but he's experimental. I know plenty of excellent cardiologists right here in the city. I can call Ted. No, Edward, I interrupted, my voice flat. Dr. Jenkins says he's the best for advanced cases. I'm going to Berkeley to see him. My sudden insistence created an uneasy silence. Edward was visibly irritated, not just by the referral itself, but by the fact that I was making a major medical decision without his input. His frustration only strengthened my resolve. I needed to know the truth. And if that meant going outside of Edward's professional circle, then that's what I would do. Sitting in my peaceful Sausalito home after the hospital stay, waiting for the appointment with Dr. Stone, the suspense was unbearable. I was stepping onto a new, uncertain path. I was fighting for my life. Yes, but I was also fighting to reclaim agency over my own body, an agency I realized I'd slowly given up to Edward over the years. The visit to a new specialist was not just a medical consultation. It was the second layer of suspense, the first real step I took entirely for myself, pushing back against Edward's silent disapproval. I knew that whatever Dr. Stone found, it would change everything. The drive across the bay to Berkeley felt long, heavy with anxiety. Edward had insisted on coming, but the silence in the car was thick. He kept trying to talk about his own work or minimize my condition, saying things like, "Stone is a little aggressive, Donna, but he'll just confirm what we already know." He wanted control, but I wanted truth. The Berkeley Heart Center was sleek and modern, a renowned cardiology practice that felt leagues away from the hospital where I'd been stabilized. I was there to meet Dr. Adrian Stone, the specialist Dr. Jenkins had referred me to. He was everything Edward wasn't in a doctor, seasoned, focused, and unhurried. He listened to me without interrupting, absorbing every detail about my breathlessness, my weakness, and my years of managed high blood pressure. He reviewed my previous tests, the ones Dr. Jenkins had run, and even the older reports Edward had grudgingly provided. Dr. Stone didn't rush to conclusions. He performed an additional, highly detailed examination, spending a long time listening to my heart, using tools that seemed much more advanced than anything I'd encountered before. He was searching for something deeper. When the examination was finally over, he sat down across from me and Edward. Edward immediately launched into a technical summary of my hypertension history, trying to steer the conversation. "She's had long-term, well-managed high blood pressure, doctor. The shock is clearly just the result of the cumulative strain on the left ventricle," Edward stated, putting on his surgeon face. Dr. Stone held up a hand, silencing Edward politely but firmly. "Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. I appreciate your input, but I need to talk to Donna about my findings." That was the first moment I felt fully seen by a doctor in years. Dr. Stone looked straight at me, his expression grave. "Mrs. Ortiz, the initial diagnosis of cardiogenic shock is correct. However, after reviewing the imaging and performing a new functional assessment, I found something your earlier tests missed. something that complicates everything. My fear grew cold and sharp. My condition was worse than I thought. I could feel Edward stiffen beside me. The moment he paused before speaking, I knew it wasn't good news. It's not just cardiogenic shock. You have a complication that could explain everything. He drew a quick diagram on a notepad, explaining that years of uncontrolled high pressure had led to a structural problem. It's a previously undiagnosed heart defect, he stated plainly. Specifically, your aortic valve is insufficient. It's not closing correctly, causing blood to leak back into your heart. This is a severe complication of your long-standing hypertension. He continued, the truth is, this valve problem has been creating a pressure overload in your heart for years. It's what drove the cardiogenic shock. Without treating this underlying valve defect, no amount of standard medication will fully stabilize you long-term. I felt the room spin. I wasn't just dealing with a weakened heart. I had a fundamental structural flaw that had been working against me for who knows how long. This wasn't something that developed overnight. This was a time bomb that Edward, the reputable surgeon managing my health, should have found. A defect. Edward's voice was sharp, cutting through the air. That is highly unlikely, Stone. Her last echo was within the normal range. Dr. Stone calmly countered him. Dr. Ortiz, the defect is subtle but severe. It was missed, but the evidence is clear now. This defect is the real cause of Mrs. Ortiz's rapidly deteriorating condition. I looked from Dr. Stone, who was offering clear, terrifying facts, to Edward, who was visibly defensive and agitated. The revelation of this hidden issue ramped up the tension beyond just the medical. It raised an immediate, glaring question. How could this have been missed? Edward managed everything. He signed off on every test. He was a surgeon. He knew what to look for. A cold certainty settled over me. This specialist's expertise and the shocking discovery weren't just about my body. They were about the cracks appearing in my marriage. I realized Dr. Stone was offering me not just a diagnosis, but the beginnings of an answer to the question. Why me? The fear was still there, but it was starting to mix with a burning curiosity and a need for accountability. I had been lied to, or at least fundamentally mismanaged. I left the Berkeley Heart Center knowing two things. My life was in greater danger than I previously thought, and Edward's involvement in my health was suddenly the most alarming part of my diagnosis. The drive back to Sausalito after the appointment with Dr. Stone was different. Edward wasn't defensive anymore. He was quiet, almost sulking. He knew he'd been publicly contradicted by a specialist. He tried to sound reassuring, suggesting that minor valve issues are common, and that Dr. Stone was simply overly cautious. But his words felt hollow, like paper. The moment we got back to our house, I didn't feel relief. I felt a chill. This beautiful, peaceful home, where I was supposed to be safe, suddenly felt like the center of a lie. I realized I was fighting two battles now, one against a failing heart, and one against the man who had promised to protect it. A few days later, Dr. Stone called me directly. Edward wasn't home. He was at the hospital. This was the privacy I needed. Mrs. Ortiz, I have been reviewing your files again, specifically the ones regarding your high blood pressure management over the last 5 years, Dr. Stone said. He sounded cautious, professional, but the undertone was clearly serious. You've been on some very specific medications, Donna. Medications that are often associated with certain research protocols. I swallowed hard. Edward handles all the prescriptions. He just tells me what to take. Dr. Stone paused. I understand, but professionally speaking, it is highly unusual for a complication this severe, this structural, to develop so rapidly and without any previous indication, especially when being monitored by a specialist in the field. He didn't directly accuse Edward, but he didn't have to. The question hung in the air. Edward, a reputable surgeon, had been managing Donna's health for years, but something felt off about his medical decisions. Donna, I can only treat what I see now. But the earlier misdiagnosis, the delayed discovery of this defect, it suggests either gross negligence or perhaps an incomplete medical history. Dr. Stone concluded, I recommend you look closely at your past records. Make sure you understand exactly what you've been taking and why. The call ended, but it left a buzzing intensity in my mind. Incomplete medical history. The first hint of a husband's potential betrayal added a layer of emotional conflict. I didn't waste a second processing the emotional shock. I walked straight to Edward's large oak desk in his private study. This was his sanctuary, where he kept all his confidential files, including all of my medical records. Edward was meticulous, bordering on obsessive about organization. I found the file folder labeled D. Ortiz Cardiac. Inside were years of perfectly filed reports, blood panel results, and pharmacy printouts. I wasn't a doctor, but I could read dates and names. I focused on the blood pressure medications he prescribed, the ones Dr. Stone had mentioned. They had complex, unfamiliar names. I started cross-referencing them against the pharmacy receipts, but then I noticed something deeply suspicious. Tucked inside a stack of old insurance claims, I found a small, crumpled envelope. It contained a pharmacy receipt and a handwritten note in Edward's precise script. The receipt was for a medication I had never heard of, an incredibly expensive, niche drug. And the note, dated nearly 3 years ago, simply read, Trial dosing. Must swap P.O. Box delivery immediately. No paper trail to home address. Trial dosing. Swap P.O. Box delivery. No paper trail to home address. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. This wasn't standard management. This wasn't even negligence. Edward hadn't just missed the defect. He had been potentially treating my hypertension with something he wanted kept secret. He had been manipulating the information. My breath hitched. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the file. The initial fear of dying was instantly overshadowed by the gut-wrenching pain of betrayal. How could Edward, the man I loved for 40 years, have missed something this big? Or worse, was he hiding it from me? It was unthinkable, yet the evidence was right in my hands. Edward hadn't just made a mistake. He had been making medical decisions that bypassed standard care and deliberately creating a lack of transparency. The audience begins to question Edward's role in Donna's deteriorating health. That was exactly where I was. I felt sick, not just from my heart, but from the sudden, profound realization that the foundation of my life, my trust in Edward, was rotten. He hadn't just been managing my health. He had been controlling the narrative of my illness. I placed the evidence back perfectly, just the way I found it, pretending to myself that I was still processing. But the decision was made. I needed to know the whole truth. This wasn't just about my valve defect anymore. It was about Edward's hidden actions. I wasn't waiting for him to confess. I need to know. I was going to find out what he had been doing and why before I faced him. The active investigation had begun. I couldn't just sit and wait for Edward to confess, or worse, keep lying. The discovery of that note, trial dosing, must swap P.O. Box delivery immediately, had flipped a switch inside me. The fear hadn't gone away, but the pain of betrayal was stronger now, fueling an intense need for proof. This wasn't about a marriage counseling session. This was about my life and my right to know how it had been managed. I stopped reflecting and started acting. Edward was busy. He was pulled back into his surgical schedule, believing he had stabilized the crisis by fussing over my recovery. This gave me the window I needed. My first target was his home office computer. Edward was careful, but I knew his routines. He kept all my digital files, test results, correspondence with other doctors, and his own research on a password-protected partition. It took me 2 late nights of methodical guessing, using old anniversaries and our children's birth dates, before I finally cracked the code. The rush I felt wasn't victory, but cold dread. Once inside, I didn't look for love letters or financial secrets. I went straight for the medical folders. I wasn't just reviewing old files. I was actively searching for evidence of that trial dosing. I found a cache of emails between Edward and a pharmaceutical research facility based out of Boston. The subject lines were coded, referring to a drug trial for advanced hypertension treatments, labeled internally as Project Vanguard. The language was heavily technical, but the goal was clear: to test a new, unproven drug on high-risk patients. I scrolled through the chain. Edward's early emails were confident, almost boasting. He wrote about his ideal candidate, a patient with long-term, refractory hypertension who was fully compliant. He was talking about me. Then, I found an exchange dated around the time of my last normal echo, the one Edward had mentioned to Dr. Stone. A researcher flagged a minor but measurable change in aortic valve function in patient Dio. Edward's response was chilling. He dismissed the finding as transient and insisted the trial medication was responsible for the patient's overall stability and needed to continue, suggesting any interruption would risk the entire study and his promised authorship on the final paper. The picture was now sickeningly clear. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. Edward hadn't missed the valve defect. He had actively minimized and masked it to ensure I stayed in his secret clinical trial. His focus on his career advancement had put his own wife's health in jeopardy. I thought back to the past few years, filtering every memory through this new, harsh reality. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Dismissed concerns. Every time I mentioned breathlessness, he'd increase a vitamin supplement, not check the function of my heart. "Donna, you're just anxious," he'd always say. He wasn't trying to calm me. He was trying to silence the evidence my body was providing. The travel. He had insisted we fly to medical conferences, ostensibly for his work, which were always near the Boston research facility. He was meeting with the pharmaceutical team, talking about me, while I thought we were just taking a nice trip. The secrecy. He'd insisted on managing my health files himself, shutting me out, and acting as the sole intermediary with other doctors. He wasn't being loving. He was ensuring the medical wall between me and the truth stayed intact. The emotional turmoil of doubting a loved one was immense, but the evidence made the decision straightforward. This wasn't about a fight over money or fidelity. This was about a profound, life-altering medical betrayal. Edward had sacrificed my safety for his professional glory. I copied everything: emails, research protocols, and Edward's own handwritten notes onto a small flash drive. I needed physical proof that couldn't be deleted. I put everything back perfectly, just like a good surgeon would. I needed to confront him, not with an accusation, but with undeniable facts. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. Edward needed to look me in the eye and tell me why he had been hiding the truth all along. I was going to give him a chance to explain, and if he lied, I was ready to walk away. The quiet evening in the Ortiz home was about to become a battlefield. The long period of doubt was over. Now, it was time for confrontation. I didn't choose the kitchen or the bedroom. I chose the living room, a formal space in our beautiful Tiburon home overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The setting was vast, elegant, and impersonal, perfect for stripping away the intimacy of marriage and discussing a cold, hard truth. Edward came home late, tired from a long surgery. He immediately launched into how well my recovery was progressing, trying to sound encouraging. "You're looking much better, Donna. I told you Jenkins was being dramatic." I stood up, holding the small flash drive and the crumpled pharmacy note from the previous chapter in my hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I was ice cold. Stop, Edward, I said simply and completely. We're not talking about how I look. We're talking about my heart and the fact that you've been lying to me about it for years. Edward's face went immediately pale. The professional surgeon facade vanished. He knew instantly that I'd found something. Lying? What are you talking about? Donna, I've managed your care meticulously. He was defensive right away, trying to fall back on his authority. I held up the note. What is Project Vanguard? Edward, what is trial dosing that required a P.O. box delivery to create a no paper trail to home address? I didn't ask the question. I stated the facts I'd found in his study. You didn't miss the defect, Edward. You knew my heart was unstable, and you minimized the symptoms to keep me in an experimental trial. The accusation hit him hard. He staggered back a step. He looked like a cornered animal. For a long minute, he didn't speak, just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumping. Then he cracked. Yes, he finally admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, I was part of a confidential study. I included you in it. I felt a cold rush of confirmation, mixed with pure, incandescent rage. You used me as a guinea pig. You put my life at risk without my knowledge or consent. I demanded answers about his involvement in my medical history, especially his decisions around my treatment. Edward looked up, and his expression shifted from defensiveness to a desperate, self-pitying plea. He denied any malicious intent, but his defense was calculated to tear me apart. I did it because I was afraid of losing you, Donna, he cried out. You know how terrified you were of the standard treatments for refractory hypertension. The side effects, the risk of stroke, it was overwhelming you. You were giving up hope. He stepped closer, his voice rising in passion. I had access to this new protocol. It was cutting edge. It offered the potential for better, faster results, with significantly fewer initial side effects. I knew the standard options would paralyze you with fear. I knew you would refuse. He threw his hands up in a gesture of agonizing, flawed love. I am a surgeon. My life is about solving impossible problems. I wanted to save your life without destroying your hope. I kept the risks from you because I couldn't let your fear kill your hope. I chose what I thought was best for your life, even if it meant risking my career. He finished, looking at me with wet eyes. Was it wrong? Maybe. But was it done out of love? Yes. My emotional outpouring was immediate and raw. You didn't save my life, Edward. You nearly killed me. You were playing God with my body. You had no right to take my consent. You lied to me for years, Edward. I trusted you with my life. How could you do this to me? I saw the internal conflict raging across Edward's face. He believed his own justification, that his act was one of paternalistic love, a desperate gamble by a doctor who also happened to be a frightened husband. He admitted that he had been hiding certain things from her. But I saw the truth underneath. His fear was mingled with professional ambition. He saw my illness as a research opportunity. The confrontation was the key, suspense-building moment. Edward's defense, that he hid the truth out of love, was designed to be the ultimate test for the audience. The betrayal was confirmed, but the motivation was now complex, gray, and agonizingly debatable. I clutched the flash drive, my resolve hardening. His explanation was not enough. Love doesn't remove autonomy. Love doesn't involve secret P.O. boxes and research projects. He may have loved me, but he loved his own judgment more. The confrontation was over. Now, I needed the final, undeniable proof of his true motives. Edward's tearful defense, that he hid the clinical trial out of misguided love, didn't hold up, not for a moment. His performance in the living room only confirmed what I'd already suspected. He was a surgeon, and he loved solving problems, but he loved his own reputation more. I knew that love doesn't involve manipulation and secrecy. I needed to see the full scope of his betrayal away from his theatrical desperation. I arranged a private meeting with Dr. Jenkins at her medical office in San Francisco, telling her I had found troubling details about Edward's management of my health. Dr. Jenkins looked deeply uncomfortable when I laid the evidence on her desk: the pharmacy receipt, Edward's cryptic note, and the printouts of the coded emails I'd copied onto the flash drive. She reviewed the information silently, her face growing grim with every line she read. "I was highly suspicious about the progression of your condition, Donna," Dr. Jenkins finally confessed, looking up. "The rate at which your heart failed, coupled with the undetected valve defect, it never added up to standard, well-managed hypertension. But I couldn't accuse a fellow surgeon without proof." I presented her with the most damning email I'd found, one where Edward explicitly detailed his enthusiasm for the project and the significant career recognition he expected from co-authoring the final paper that utilized his compliant patient. Dr. Jenkins read the specific line about the career recognition. That was the moment the protective professional barrier broke down. "This confirms it, Donna," she said, sighing heavily. "Edward didn't just participate in an experimental treatment study for high blood pressure. He risked you as his primary subject." She explained the reality of his action. Edward had been testing a new, experimental drug that was meant to quickly reduce blood pressure and reverse cardiac remodeling. He hadn't fully informed me of the risks involved. Worse, when the initial scan showed the aortic valve insufficiency, the complication Dr. Stone later found, Edward should have immediately pulled me out of the trial. Instead, Dr. Jenkins confirmed, he chose to bury the information to protect the data and, most importantly, his focus on career advancement. His judgment was completely clouded. He saw me, his wife, not as a patient who needed comprehensive care, but as a critical component of his professional success. The revelation was crushing. Edward's supposed defense, the love he claimed, was just a smokescreen for his ambition. He was willing to sacrifice my life for his own curriculum vitae. I felt the last thread of hope and forgiveness snap. The heartbreak was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve for justice. I thought Edward was doing what was best for me, but now I know he was willing to sacrifice me for his own career ambitions. I told Dr. Jenkins, the words tasting like ash. This chapter turned Edward from a well-meaning but flawed character into a man who had made an irreversible mistake. He hadn't just been sloppy. He had engaged in a clear breach of medical ethics and spousal trust. I realized how much power Edward had wielded. He used his professional status to silence my questions, to manage my anxiety, and ultimately to enroll me in a high-risk trial without my consent. This kind of power imbalance, where a spouse uses a position of authority to control another's life, was a heavy and deeply relatable theme for my generation. Many of us women had, at some point, ceded control of big decisions to our husbands, believing they knew best. My story was the nightmare scenario of what happens when that trust is utterly betrayed. My heartbreak turned into a fight for justice. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. This wasn't just about my physical health. It was about reclaiming my right to self-determination. I knew the next step had to be swift and public. I couldn't just divorce him. I had to ensure he faced professional accountability for his actions. The discovery of the full truth gave me the moral and legal authority to fight back. I left Dr. Jenkins' office not as a fragile patient, but as an enraged woman ready to fight for what was right. The battle for my health was now inextricably linked to the battle for justice. Leaving Dr. Jenkins' office that day, with the full, devastating truth laid bare, was a turning point. Edward's defense of misguided love was dead. He didn't just hurt me, he used me to advance his career, and that was unforgivable. My heartbreak solidified into a powerful resolve. I wasn't just a patient fighting cardiogenic shock anymore. I was a woman fighting for justice and my own dignity. My first step towards self-reclamation was physical. I went straight to the bank and opened my own private account, transferring a significant amount of money out of our joint accounts. I was cutting the financial cord, ensuring Edward couldn't control this aspect of my life either. Then I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elaine Miller, specializing in medical malpractice and high-asset divorces. I needed someone who understood not just the marriage contract, but the doctor-patient contract Edward had so carelessly shredded. Meeting Elaine was the beginning of the external drama. We met in a downtown San Francisco office overlooking the financial district. I presented her with the evidence, the printouts of the coded emails detailing Project Vanguard, the pharmacy receipts for the experimental drug, and Dr. Stone's detailed notes confirming the delayed diagnosis of the valve defect. Elaine was immediately focused. Donna, this isn't just divorce. This is medical battery, a profound breach of trust, and potential research misconduct. We have a very strong case. The decision to sue Edward was heavy, but necessary. The health risks he exposed me to were now compounded by the emotional betrayal. How could I move forward knowing he faced no accountability for putting my life on a research whim? The process started immediately. Elaine filed the necessary paperwork, not just for the divorce, but for the malpractice suit. I remember signing the papers in her office, my hand shaking slightly, but my resolve steady. That moment, signing my name on the court documents, felt more vital than any medication I'd taken in years. It was the moment I stopped being Edward's patient and started being my own advocate. I moved out of the Tiburon house and back to my smaller home in Sausalito. I needed space to breathe, away from the walls that held all the memories of his deceit. Edward was blindsided by the legal papers. He called, he raged, he pleaded, switching between the frantic surgeon and the wounded husband. He tried to tell me I was ruining his reputation, destroying his career. Your reputation ruined itself the moment you decided your professional ambition was worth more than my life, Edward, I told him simply before hanging up the phone. The sight of the San Francisco courthouse quickly became a familiar image. The legal action added a layer of external drama that focused my energy outward. I was no longer agonizing internally, I was fighting. This chapter became my journey towards empowerment. I began to understand the true cost of ceding control. I had allowed myself to be managed, believing it was easier and safer, only to discover that it was the greatest risk of all. Now, I was learning about my medical rights, my legal rights, and my inherent right to demand truth. This chapter reinforced the themes of justice and self-reclamation. I was doing this for myself, but also for every woman who had ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or controlled in her own home or in a doctor's office. I knew the road ahead was long, fraught with painful court appearances and public exposure. But standing up for myself, especially at 66 and facing a critical health condition, gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. The fear of dying hadn't vanished, but the fear of letting Edward win was much greater. I looked out at the bay from my Sausalito window, a new, fierce determination settling in my chest. I said the words out loud, to myself, to the silent house, to the man who thought he knew me. I may have lost my health, but I will not lose my dignity. It's time to fight for what's right. I was ready to face the divorce and the malpractice suit. I was fighting for my truth, and that fight was giving me a new, profound reason to live. The legal battle with Edward was messy, just as Elaine had predicted. It dragged on, full of depositions and emotional testimony. Edward lost his defense of love quickly, The documentary proof of his research ambition was too strong. The state medical board began its own investigation, and the public scrutiny was immense. I stayed focused on the San Francisco courthouse, but my heart and my hope were back home in Sausalito. Edward settled the divorce quickly once he realized the malpractice suit was going to expose his career. The marriage was over, and the emotional tether was finally cut. I got the full truth, justice, and the financial independence I needed to start over. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in my own chest. Dr. Stone, the specialist, had me on a new, comprehensive treatment plan that addressed the valve defect, and my energy slowly, steadily started to return. My health scare became the catalyst, the terrible push I needed to finally take control of my life. I was 66, starting over, and completely free from the manipulations of my past. I transformed my Sausalito home from Edward's formal showpiece into a cozy sanctuary just for me. I sold the big, imposing furniture Edward loved, and filled the space with things that brought me comfort, bright colors, soft textures, and books that had nothing to do with surgical journals. I focused intensely on my health and my newfound independence. I started walking every morning by the water. The sun on the bay was dazzling, and the air was fresh. Those early walks, where I could breathe deeply without the fear of immediate collapse, were my therapy. I wasn't just walking away from Edward. I was walking toward building a future on my own terms. I reconnected with friends Edward had quietly dismissed over the years, women who understood the complexity of long marriages and the silent compromises we make. They celebrated my strength and my willingness to fight for myself. The overall story theme of empowerment and self-discovery had come full circle. I transformed from a woman living in doubt and fear to one who was confidently taking control of her future. I often sat by the window, looking out at the glittering water on a sunny day. I reflected on the lessons I'd learned and the strength I'd gained. The hardest lesson was that I had allowed my trust in Edward's professional title to override my own intuition. I'd given away my voice, believing he was protecting me, when he was simply protecting his own ambition. But I was done with that old story. The medical betrayal had given me a second chance at life, not just physically, but emotionally. The story was closing on an uplifting note, reinforcing the theme of self-love and resilience. I realized I was vibrant again, and it had nothing to do with Edward's approval or management. I've learned that love starts with me, loving myself enough to say no, enough to walk away, and enough to start over. This resilience, this self-love, was the most important diagnosis I'd ever received. My life wasn't over. It was finally mine. My fight for justice wasn't just about Edward. It was about reclaiming the dignity that every woman deserves. I want my story to be a message for women everywhere, especially those who, like me, are over 65 and may feel invisible or powerless. Your life is yours. Your health is yours. Trust your gut. A final message to you. If my journey resonated with you, if you've ever questioned a diagnosis or a decision made by someone you trusted, please know you are not alone. Your health and your truth are worth fighting for. Thank you for watching my story and staying with me through this entire experience. If you connected with my struggle and my decision to fight for justice, please like this video and share it with a friend who might need to hear this message of empowerment. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would have been the hardest part of the betrayal for you? And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. The next chapter of my life is just beginning, and I'll be sharing my journey toward health and independence, starting with my next video on life after heart failure. I hope you'll join me there.